Good afternoon. If we could all quiet down, I think we're about ready to start. First off, thank you all for coming. On behalf of the Student Bar Association, I'd like to welcome you to the first lecture of our speaker series. We strive to bring in exciting speakers into the law school who can share their knowledge and expertise on relevant legal topics. Given the recent events surrounding the West Memphis 3, I can't imagine a better speaker for us to kick off the series with than the one that we have for today. A special thanks goes to Professor McClurg for bringing this opportunity to our attention. Following the lecture, there will be time for some Q&A, but as I know many of you, this is your lunch hour. We'll try to have you out of here by 1 o'clock. As you probably know today, our speaker is Mara Leveritt. She has worked in newspaper and web reporting in the state of Arkansas for the last 30 years. In 1994, she was named the Arkansas Journalist of the Year and has also won numerous other awards for her investigative reporting. In 1998, she published The Boys on the Track, a book which examined the still unsolved murders of 2 Arkansas teenagers and the corruption surrounding the case. In 2002, she published the most recent book, which she'll be talking about today, The Devil's Knot, which examines the legal irregularities that were prevalent in the case of the West Memphis 3. For that book and also The Boys on the Track, she won the Booker Werther Prize in 2003 and 1998. As you all know, just recently the West Memphis 3 were set free but not exonerated. So the timing of the speaker could not be any better than it is now. And so without further ado, please welcome the award-winning author, Mara Leveritt.
Thank you, Stephen. I got to say, I've been well taken care of this morning, and I appreciate it. I'm very glad to be able to speak to you all here about a case that is very relevant to anyone interested in law and to anyone interested in law in this region in particular. So that said, let me begin by going back just 6 weeks ago to August 19th in Jonesboro, Arkansas, where 3 men who were in prison the day before stood before Circuit Judge David Laser. The 3 prisoners had been locked up for almost 18 years for murdering 3 West Memphis children in 1993. Jason Baldwin and Jesse Miskelly, who were 16 and 17 years old at the time of the killings, were serving sentences of life without parole. Damian Eccles, 18 at the time of the murders, was awaiting a sentence of death. I was one of the reporters in that courtroom 6 weeks ago. In a swift series of legal moves negotiated just days before, the 3 convicted killers, all of whom maintained they were innocent, pled guilty to the murders and signed a few papers and walked out of the courtroom free men. Stunning would understate the magnitude of that event. Even Judge Laser observed at the end of the half-hour hearing that what had just transpired no doubt would be discussed for years. I believe it will be studied for a long, long time as one of the most extraordinary reversals in American legal history. Let's retrace a bit of the remarkable story that led to this turn of events. By the way, I should add, none of what I'm about to recount will make much sense unless you bear in mind one particular word. That word is politics. I'm sure that some of you remember when 3 8-year-olds were murdered in West Memphis. Probably many of you don't because you were so young. I'm a mom, and I remember well the panic and horror that surrounded those deaths. Some of you will remember the added revulsion when word leaked out that one of the children murdered had also been castrated. A month later, when the 3 teenagers were arrested, and the reports immediately followed that the teens had murdered the children as a part of a satanic ritual, the intensity of those murders increased. There was widespread satisfaction when juries sentenced Baldwin and Miss Kelly to life in prison. Anyone who saw TV footage of 18-year-old Damian Eccles, the trio's purported ringleader, flipping the finger to members of the victim's family probably felt more than satisfied when he was sentenced to death. There followed, as some of you probably know, the HBO documentary Paradise Lost. It came out 2 years after the trials. Remarkably, the judge had allowed HBO to film both of the 2 trials that were conducted in this case. My book, Devil's Knot, came out in 2002. I tried to go back with a book, with what you can do in a book that cannot be done even in an excellent documentary such as Paradise Lost was. I tried to go back and, in a book of some 400 pages with 400 footnotes, to examine what actually went on legally that allowed this case to unfold as it did. I had begun reporting on it 3 weeks after the arrests. I'm still at it today. I'm writing a second book. A few years ago, after the publication of Devil's Knot, I became an advocate for the release of these men, or at least for new trials for them. The state of Arkansas insisted that they were guilty. I had heard state officials say, as public momentum after release of Paradise Lost, public momentum, shock, bewilderment, amazement, and even outrage began to develop around the country. Pressure started building from outside of Arkansas inward for new trials, questioning the lack of evidence. The response when reporters from the New York Times, CNN, and other media asked police in West Memphis and other state officials about this growing public support for the men in prison, the state official response continuously was very condescending. Those are good-hearted people, we're sure, but they're not from Arkansas and they don't know what really happened. Well, I'd read the entire transcript. I'd written about it. My book had been out for a couple of years by then, had not ever seriously been challenged. And so I finally told my editor at the Arkansas Times, which has consistently reported on this case, I told him that I was going to maintain my role as a reporter and continue reporting on the case, but I was also going to take the unusual step of becoming an advocate. I was going to start speaking out and say, I am an Arkansan, I do know what happened in this case, and these men did not get fair trials. So that is what I have done. The Arkansas Grapevine had allowed West Memphis police to dismiss their critics. But it did not change the facts. And those were that the case had been entirely circumstantial. At one point, there was some physical evidence. It came from a man who entered a fast food restaurant, a Bojangles, along the side of the freeway, a Bojangles restaurant on the night that the boys disappeared. He went into a women's restroom to clean up mud and blood. That was reported to the West Memphis police, along with the reports of the parents that the boys were missing at that time. The next day, after the bodies were found, the people at the Bojangles restaurant called again to the police and said, don't you want to come in and take samples, collect the evidence? We've saved it. The police did. But what happened to that evidence? The West Memphis police later admitted in court that it had been lost. I ask you to imagine what might have happened if, as soon as the bodies of the children were found, the West Memphis police had issued an APB for the man seen in the restaurant. The restaurant very close to where the bodies had just been discovered, a man covered in mud and blood. What if they had asked truckers and the general public for information on this person of interest. Of course, none of that happened. The public never heard of that man until the teenagers' trials 9 months later, where the police admitted that even the evidence they did collect from the restroom had been lost. By then, Mr. Bojangles, as he has come to be known, was nothing more than a footnote to the trials of the 3 boys who were also publicly known by then as satanic killers. Essentially, all the prosecutors had to go on was a confession. A month after the murders, when police still had not made an arrest, they asked Jesse Miskelly, a former special ed student, to come to the station to be interviewed. He did not have a lawyer or a parent with him. He was 17 years old. During what turned into 8 hours of questioning, only 2 brief parts of which were recorded, Miskelly eventually told police that he had seen Eccles and Baldwin kill the boys and that at one point he had helped. Miskelly recanted his statements the next day, but by then it didn't matter. Police had already arrested him and the other 2. Prosecutors promised the public they would seek the death penalty against all 3. Yet there were severe problems with Miskelly's confession, even the 2 brief recorded parts. He got key details wrong. For instance, he initially said that Eccles and Baldwin attacked the boys in the morning, but police knew that the children had been in school all day. As detectives prompted him, Miskelly incrementally changed his time to later in the day, and that can be heard even on the recorded parts of his statement. Miskelly said that the victims were tied with brown rope. In fact, they were tied with their own shoelaces, none of which were brown. He said Eccles and Baldwin had stabbed the boys while they were still in their clothes, but examiners found no cuts in the clothing. He said the boys were sexually assaulted, but autopsies showed no evidence of that. Prosecutors played the recorded parts of Miskelly's statement at his trial. When Miskelly's attorney asked a detective to explain the discrepancies, the officer said, "Jesse just got confused." Miskelly was convicted. 2 years later, the Arkansas Supreme Court affirmed his conviction unanimously, noting that the parts of his statement that were played at his trial constituted the only evidence against him. A month after Miskelly's conviction, prosecutors brought Eccles and Baldwin to trial. These 2 had to be tried separately because they had insisted they were innocent and because, despite offers of a reduced sentence, Miskelly would not repeat his accusation that he had seen them murder the boys. Prosecutors faced the second trial knowing they had no confession, no murder weapon, no eyewitness, and no physical evidence. Well, they did have some physical evidence. A crime lab technician testified that fibers found with the bodies and others taken from the boys' homes were microscopically similar. After my book came out, a Little Rock crime scene investigator told me that phrase can mean anything. All human hair, all cotton, all polyester is microscopically similar. And there was this. 4 months after the teenagers were arrested, Deputy Prosecutor John Fogelman had the state police search a small lake near where Baldwin lived. A diver came up holding a serrated knife. Fogelman would later enter this knife into evidence, suggesting that it had been used in the murders. That was an unsupported claim, but it seemed to connect Baldwin to the crime. To bolster that connection, prosecutors brought into court a teenager who'd been jailed with Baldwin. The young burglar testified that Baldwin had confessed to him. In Arkansas, hearsay, while not allowed in